I tend to believe that President Putin is operating in good faith. He said that he was going to be operating in good faith to the president yesterday, and I take him at his word.
I mean, if that's what Putin said, then okay, I guess. I don't know. I feel like I'm going to look at the actions here, too, because that interview that Witkoff is doing is about a phone call yesterday between Trump and Putin where they were discussing a ceasefire and trying to find a way to bring about an end to the war. When that call wrapped up, Russia immediately began firing drones into Ukraine, 150 to be specific. So it's very hard for me. And look, I got it. Mr. Witkoff has a lot more information than I do, much more nuanced, detailed data coming out of this war and understanding of the three parties involved than I do, and it's not even close. But it's very hard for me to look at 150 drones being launched by Russia into Ukraine right when this phone call ends and say, that Vladimir dude over there, good faith actor. He is trying to find a way to bring about an end to the war. You couldn't sit on that for a day or two, just kind of show we're trying to find peace. That had to happen right after okay, got it. Now, to be fair, Russia did say that they shot down 7 of their own drones that were mistakenly fired from Crimea towards Ukrainian energy infrastructure. And here's the thing. That's impossible to prove at this point, or we don't have any evidence of this. It's war. Everybody lies. Everybody exaggerates. So you got to trust but verify whenever you can. But the worst offender in that category, hands down, has got to be Russian air defense. I mean, at this point, we have heard that Russian air defense, it's almost a daily joke. They successfully shoot down every single Ukrainian drone that enters their airspace, while simultaneously never, definitely, without a doubt, accidentally shoot down their own aircraft or, God forbid, a civilian airliner. That would never happen. So, look, any claims of any sort coming from Russian air defense, really going to want to see some claims, especially one like this, saying that they actually shot down and intercepted their own munitions out of the kindness of their heart. That's one that we should ask for a little more evidence on. Now, looking at the timeline of attacks here, I think is important. So Dara Massacat over on X, an incredible Russia analyst, and I'll link this thread in the description below, but she ran through a timeline saying, hey, we know that whether or not Russia said, like, don't use those certain Garans and don't hit those specific targets, they did continue striking Ukraine well into the night. So based on the flight time of these drones, 1 to 2 hours from launch until impact, because we know a couple of the launch locations in Russia, these attacks started around 7 p.m. Kyiv time, right when the call ended between Putin and Trump, and then they continued until about 2 a.m. So even if they were late getting the order and they said, oh, we had to get those last couple out, make sure those specific drones aren't actually launched, they still continue to fire into Ukraine into the early morning. And again, we don't know exactly what was hit, which is not unusual in this conflict. Anytime Ukraine comes under a missile or drone attack, the actual battle damage assessment is classified because they're in the middle of a war. But it's very hard for me to look at these 150 drones launched immediately upon wrap of that meeting and saying, that right there looks like a good faith effort from Mr. Putin. Now, as this attack was underway, Ukraine said, hey, guess we better respond and retaliate here. So Ukraine launched their own drone attack into Russian territory against Russian oil refineries and oil depots, hit a few of those. And this is almost too hard to believe. Russia looked at that, and I'll put the screenshot up here just to make sure that we're all clear, and said, the Kremlin views the Ukrainian armed forces' attacks on energy facilities in Kuban as sabotage of agreements. Yes. So Russia attacks Ukraine, Ukraine attacks Russia, and Russia says, hey, that's not you guys. What are you doing? We're not doing that anymore. Now, one confusing piece that I've seen floating around here that's worth clarifying is there was no ceasefire in place. There has not been a ceasefire in place between Russia and Ukraine. Okay, so about a week ago, Zelensky agreed to just an immediate ceasefire across the board. That wasn't accepted by Russia. And the way these ceasefires work is like both sides have to agree to it or it's nothing. So just keep that in mind. In this case, Trump floated an energy and infrastructure ceasefire. That was from the White House statement yesterday. The Kremlin statement actually didn't touch on that. They wanted more. They wanted this to include, the stoppage of U.S. aid, the stopping of sharing military intelligence with Ukraine, and quite a bit more. But either way, let's say behind the scenes, we don't have access to it, Russia and the United States agree to the exact wording of a ceasefire agreement. They need Ukraine to agree to that, or it's not a thing, right? So again, let's give everyone benefit of the doubt here. There's a Loctite ceasefire agreement in place that the United States and Russia agree on. Russia began firing drones into Ukraine before Ukraine even knew what happened in this meeting. So this isn't a matter of like, well, Ukraine hadn't agreed to it, or they did agree to it. They hadn't even seen the contents yet. I mean, Ukraine was getting the same information that we were. It wasn't until today that President Trump spoke with President Zelensky and kind of filled him in on the whole meeting. So no, the ceasefire was not in place, which I feel like is worth clarifying because it was not necessarily Russia violating a ceasefire. It also certainly was not Ukraine violating a ceasefire. It's just, again, very hard to look at this and say, yeah, that's a Russian good faith effort trying to bring about peace in this war. Now, shifting over to the actual officials here, we've got a Trump interview that was, I believe this was last night, actually, with Laura Ingraham of Fox News. And this gets into some of the details of the actual call, because as of this point, all we really have is a readout from the White House and a readout from the Kremlin. And they kind of are speaking a different language. We talked about that in a video yesterday, and that's kind of confirmed here in this quick segment with Laura Ingraham. Let's give this a listen.
Non-negotiables mentioned by Putin. It was reported that I think the Kremlin media actually stated that he demanded an immediate cessation of aid to Ukraine in order to get to this multi-step deal.
No, he didn't. We didn't talk about aid. Actually, we didn't talk about aid at all. We talked about a lot of things, but aid was never discussed.
Okay, so to be clear, the Russian statement in the Kremlin readout was, quote, "It was emphasized that the key condition for preventing the escalation of the conflict and working towards its resolution through political and diplomatic means should be the complete cessation of foreign military aid and the provision of intelligence information to Kyiv." So what do you do with this information, right? You've got the Kremlin saying this is an important aspect of the call, and of course we hammered it because it's a key condition to finding an end to this conflict. And then Trump saying, no, we didn't talk about that at all. Like, what's the takeaway there? I don't know how do you read into that at that point? Hopefully there was actually like a recording of that conversation or other parties sitting in, because they're kind of heading in drastically different directions right now. But that piece right there about the continuation of military aid to Ukraine is interesting, because what happened next was a phone call between Trump and Zelensky and some of Trump's key advisors, like Secretary of State Marco Rubio and National Security Advisor Michael Waltz sitting in. They issued a statement, and they actually talked about, hey, I think we probably could find a way to continue sending military aid, new aid, actually, on top of that. Now, this is a statement put together by Rubio and Waltz, read by the White House press secretary. Let's go ahead and give that a listen.
President Trump fully briefed President Zelensky on his conversation with Putin and the key issues discussed. They reviewed the situation in Kursk and agreed to share information closely between their defense staffs as the battlefield situation evolved. President Zelensky asked for additional air defense systems to protect his civilians, particularly Patriot missile systems, and President Trump agreed to work with him to find what was available, particularly in Europe.
Okay, so something I want to highlight here is we don't have to know the details of this call at all. So they're choosing what they're going to put out. So in this instance, the United States government, this administration, Rubio, Waltz, Trump, whoever else is involved at this point, decided the thing that we are going to say and put out publicly is that Zelensky asked for more air defense, which isn't a secret. He's been asking for air defense like every single day ever. It's a massive shortage in Ukraine. We decided, let's put out publicly, we're on board. We're going to look for ways to try to source more air defense for Ukraine, and we're going to make sure that our militaries are continuing to stay in touch around the battlefield in Kursk. Again, this could have been a quick readout of like, yeah, it went well, everybody's on the same page, but instead the United States focuses on, it looks like military aid is going to continue, is kind of my read of that. It might take a different shape going forward, but that's in the conversations. Now, they did continue to talk about the possibility of a ceasefire between Ukraine and Russia. Let's hear what they had to say in this statement.
The two leaders also agreed on a partial ceasefire against energy. Technical teams will meet in Saudi Arabia in the coming days to discuss broadening the ceasefire to the Black Sea on the way to a full ceasefire. They agreed this could be the first step toward the full end of the war and ensuring security. President Zelensky was grateful for the president's leadership in this effort and reiterated his willingness to adopt a full ceasefire.
I feel like that's something we're going to need a lot more details on. Is it a partial ceasefire because it's only about energy and infrastructure, or is it partially covering energy and infrastructure. It does seem like we're kind of getting down in the weeds here, but the big picture positive news is it does sound like, following the call between Trump and Putin and then Trump and Zelensky, they are moving towards Saudi Arabia in the next couple days here to continue this conversation. But the last piece here that really stood out to me, and I am kind of grabbing little clips, I'll link the whole thing in the description below. Look, there's a lot of like fluff, if you will, in these readouts. I'm trying to spare you some of that nonsense, but the last piece that stood out to me here was essentially the United States talking about security guarantees for Ukraine by another name. Here, listen to this.
President Trump also discussed Ukraine's electrical supply and nuclear power plants. He said that the United States could be very helpful in running those plants with its electricity and utility expertise. American ownership of those plants would be the best protection for that infrastructure and support for Ukrainian energy infrastructure.
I mean, I know the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant has been in the news a lot recently. I guess that's kind of what they're hinting at. But again, we're kind of talking around the idea of a security guarantee. This is something we heard a lot during the mineral deal or the rare earth deal that was coming up was, yeah, we can't say security guarantee, but what we can say is that's going to be a U.S. economic interest, and we are going to defend our economic interests. We'll see if that actually works, and we'll see, of course, what Russia's take is on all of this. But that's about what we have right now in terms of the ongoing ceasefire negotiations between Russia and Ukraine, with the United States standing right in the middle. That's all I got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.